Brilliant. Well, as you can see, we're not only a nation of innovators, but there are certainly some incredible innovators right here in Colorado. So it is my pleasure to introduce someone who has deep passion for innovation, and that is, of course, Mark Sirangelo, Chief Innovation Officer, State of Colorado, Chairman of the Colorado Innovation Network, or COIN, Corporate Vice President of Sierra Nevada Corporation's Space Systems, and I'm going to allow Mark now to turn over the baton.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Come on, guys. They're being shy here, the entrepreneurial innovators here. I am really thrilled to be able to help moderate this session. We're going to just have a conversation, really, because I think to hear the stories, to hear the challenges, to hear the opportunities from this great group of panelists, I think is really what we're all here to be about. So I'm going to walk over and we're going to have a conversation with each other. Morning, guys.
Morning. Good morning.
Come on, it's better than that. It's a good morning.
Good morning.
There we go. So why don't, rather than my reading your bios, I think it'd be good if you would introduce yourself to the crowd and just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start the conversation. So we'll start on the end.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Corbett. I'm the founder of a company called Aware. You just saw a really very nicely done video by Colorado State University on us. I started my career, I'm an agricultural climatologist at the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, part of the CGIAR system down in Mexico. So I spent about the first half of my career really overseas. I did my PhD work in Kenya, took this postdoc, hired staff, but it was internationally oriented. And really the lessons from there manifest themselves in what you heard today about localization, because of course, in sub-Saharan Africa, we lived in Kenya for 5 years as well. Everything's about 1 and 2 acre plots. And one of the lessons learned there is the only thing that really matters to a farmer is information that's appropriate for their particular locale. And so that has become kind of the basis upon which our information company, our ag intelligence company has grown.
Thanks, John. Frank?
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Frank Curtis. You can probably tell by the accent I've traveled further than most people to be here, but I have lived in Fort Collins for almost 5 years now. My career started in the late 1970s as a plant breeder. I spent the first few years of my working life initially as a barley breeder, and I then went on to lead the hybrid wheat breeding program that was actually in those days owned by Shell. After a few years of research in hybrid wheat, Shell decided that the product wasn't looking like it was going to be economically viable, and they closed down the hybrid wheat program, and I thought, oh dear, that's the end of my job here. But fortunately, they found a position for me in the marketing department as a kind of interpreter between the breeders and the salesmen to translate the technical language into something the salesman could use on their own. I really enjoyed that part of my career and developed my role into one of marketing, first locally in the UK and then internationally. And gradually I moved on from marketing into management roles in both seed production, marketing, seed sales, product development, etc. And it was around about the mid-2000s, about 2006, 2007, when my company, Lima Grain, decided that they had made such a large investment in cereal breeding technology that it was time they leveraged that outside of Europe and got to grips with markets in the rest of the world. And I was given an international role researching markets and investigating opportunities in different countries. That led to a number of trips to the United States, during which time my job, and I didn't realize I was kind of doing it for myself at that time, but my job was to explore the US wheat market, go and visit the main wheat breeders, particularly the public programs, find out where wheat breeding was successful, and go back with a recommendation to the board of Lima Grain where we should base our US operation. Now, Lima Grain's a big company, but at the end of the day, it's owned by farmers. It's entirely owned by farmers, about 1,500 shareholders, all in France. And That's one of the nicest things about working for this company. You know, the objectives that are set out for myself and our team here are that we are tasked with the job by the farmers of improving agriculture for farmers. So we are in a completely different bracket to the Monsantos, the Bayers, etc. We're farmer-owned and working for farmers. So I got the opportunity to research where I thought we should set up the company in the United States. And for reasons that you've heard from Greg Graff and John Hickenlooper this morning, we ended up in Fort Collins.
Well, very good. Frank was being a little modest. He took 20 trips to the States in 18 months to figure this problem out. So we're very glad that you decided to stay here and join us in Colorado. Jason?
Good. Good morning. My name is Jason Vieth. I run a few functions over at Whitewave Foods. Whitewave, you may know, is about a $3 billion manufacturer of health and wellness-oriented food and beverage based in Broomfield, Colorado, just down the road. We have brands including Silk almond milk and soy milk, Horizon Organic, International Delight, Earthbound Farm. And as such, we have two then of the largest organic food brands in the country. I've been here for about 7 years. During that time, I've seen the company grow from just about $1 billion to $3 billion, essentially by riding the major trends in food, which include transparency back to the ingredients and the source of the food, health and wellness-oriented foods that are better for the earth as well as for the humans consuming them. And it's been a great ride. I run strategy, business development, and innovation. As such, I help to direct the company towards the biggest opportunities and away from those that we don't want to chase on the strategy side. In business development, obviously then, setting the M&A strategy and helping to go execute through to the transactions, which recently have included Earthbound Farm and So Delicious, two companies that really are on trend in terms of connecting consumers back closer to the ag complex and providing that transparency to nutritious food. And then on the innovation side, I've helped to set up a new team at Whitewave that's really focused on emulating where we came from, which, you know, if you think about this company that 7 years ago was owned by Dean Foods, which is a large conventional dairy player, there were two businesses within that portfolio that were purchased. That was the Silk and the Horizon business based here in Colorado. And when we set up the Whitewave organization, we deliberately kept it here in Colorado because of the legacy of those two businesses as well as the entrepreneurial organizations that existed here. And as a member of Naturally Boulder, who's based up in Boulder and essentially dedicated to supporting and nurturing innovation and innovative companies here in the Colorado community, we see an incredible amount of opportunity as we go forward to tap that community. And so back to my original point, we set up an innovation team that is essentially looking to replicate and to work with the entrepreneurs in Colorado to be able to continue to bring new brands, new products, and new businesses to consumers that stay on that health and wellness-oriented, environmentally oriented, connectivity to the ag complex-oriented direction.
Very good. Thank you, Jason. John Paul?
I'm John Paul Maxfield. I'm a buff. Go back. Sorry, I'm just kidding.
Move away?
No, I'm kidding. I'm the founder and CEO of Waste Farmers. We're a sustainable agriculture company, and our goal is to empower farmers of the 21st century to grow consciously. And so we look at the farmers of the 21st century and those that we're focused on as the subsistence farmers that you talked about, the growing trend for indoor agriculture, part of that driven by cannabis in this part of the country, and the unsuspecting farmer, which is the 40 million acres of turf in the 103 households across the U.S. that could be putting that food to more productive use. So we have a couple different brands. We have Maxfield in batch 64. Maxfield you'll see sold through Whole Foods and Independent Lawn and Garden, targeting sort of that same demographic, that low-cost consumer, those wanting to connect back to the food system. And batch 64 is named after a very famous amendment here in this state that some of you might be familiar with. And that's been a very interesting, you know, I say it with a smirk, but it's an incredible industry, and it's going to be one that drives innovation. And what I wanted to say is, I'm so tired of hearing about the Silicon Valley. And I want the Silicon Valley to say that they're the Fort Collins of technology. And I think that, and I think the parallels are there, though. If you think back, and this is where we sort of fit in, is we want to create a company that creates jobs and is focused on where agriculture can go. By way of background, my great-grandfather was the largest sheep producer in the country. My grandfather helped build up the Torrington Livestock Auction, which some of you might be familiar with. Used to do cattle reports on 850 KOA. And I also had the great fortune of growing up next to Mr. Blake. So that's where I've got the passion for CSU too. But if you look at technology and how it grew, and it's analogous to agriculture from my perspective, back when HP was driving things, there was big, huge computers and mainframes. And there was a counterculture hippie movement, and they didn't really want to get involved. And then there was this opportunity for personal computers to start coming around, and people could tinker on their own, and they could tinker on small scales. And you saw Wozniak come in, and you saw Steve Jobs come in and say, wait a minute, we can monetize this, right? And so you saw that counterculture starting to get engaged with technology. And I think we're seeing similar things starting to happen in agriculture, which once was a very yield-driven, huge, massive industry requiring big swaths of land and so forth. We're seeing through urban ag, sort of this counterculture, this tinkering, this point in time where we're experimenting and tinkering, and I think it's going to drive a lot of innovation moving forward. So it's really exciting, and we're just, we're excited to be in this room and be a part of this discussion. So thanks for having us.
Very good, John Paul. So what we're going to do is really be very simple. We're going to ask 3 different questions. The first one is going to be, what was the spark, the really big thing that's created the seminal change in each of your companies or your lives? What's the thing that made a difference? The second thing is, what is the innovative thing that you're working on right now? And the third thing is, what's the most challenging, controversial, or difficult thing that you're facing to look at the future? And I know as an entrepreneur, I've gone through those 3 different questions in my head all the time. And I'm fortunate enough to be chair of the Colorado Innovation Network. And each of the situations we see have some element of that. Something happened that made a difference, that took you to the next level or gave you that passion. Something is driving you to go forward where you are now, and something is holding you back or is the challenge that has to be overcome for you to get to the next level. And that's what I'd like to ask about. So maybe I'll start with you, Jason. What was your company went from $1 billion to $3 billion in a few years. How did that happen? Some of it was acquisition, but there was more to it. What was the thing that really made a difference there?
Yeah, it's probably not fair for me to share this, but I'll do my best. Greg Ingles, our chairman and CEO, had a vision for a roll-up opportunity within the dairy industry. Saw a number of dairies that were operating independently, all under-leveraged, going through challenging financial times. And as he got into that industry and looked to roll it up similarly to how he did the ice business, he found this silk business attached to one of the dairies. And once he came to understand the business and understand then, moreover, the food and the opportunity it presented to create better health and better environment through this product, he became incredibly attached to it. And that's really where he separated the businesses and started to put together then the Horizon Silk business and build this overall Whitewave organization. So I would probably point a lot of the growth back towards what we saw in the non-dairy business, where we know that, for instance, we saw some great stats a moment ago on the dairy business, but in the non-dairy business, you have these milks that essentially have, that require 60% less greenhouse gases and 60% less water than does conventional dairy. So you create this environmental benefit, obviously, by transitioning folks into there. And then we also found that there was incredible taste opportunity, incredible health opportunity, linking back to heart health, linking back to other benefits without saturated fats, et cetera. And so we've taken that and really pushed that as an opportunity forward. That's been a big innovation engine for us at Whitewave.
Very good. Frank, you came over here and did a search all over the country, found Colorado, but you didn't say why. What was the motivation behind these 1,500 farmers in France to decide to come to the U.S. and begin this operation? And grace us with your presence. How did it happen?
Yeah, well, the motivation was looking at the extent of the investment in plant breeding technology in Europe and saying there are global markets here. If we are going to compete on the same level, for example, as Syngenta and DuPont Pioneer, etc., we need to leverage this technology in other countries. And they sent me out here on a mission with a list of criteria. And the list of criteria were really very simple. Number one, you have to find an intensive wheat growing state. It's got to be one of the major wheat producers because this is all about wheat breeding. There will be other crops in the future, but wheat is number one.
Are those two words, intensive and wheat growing, or are they the same word?
Well, most of the wheat growing in Colorado is extensive, but
Yeah.
let's say a state with a lot of wheat. And 2.5 million acres in Colorado, it's in the top 10. So firstly, a state with a lot of wheat. Secondly, somewhere where there is a center of agricultural research excellence. And that's for two reasons. Firstly, because part of the culture of the Lima Grain organization is not to try and do things on our own. We work in collaboration with different organizations all over the world. And they said, look for a university that is really at the forefront in wheat research. The second reason for situating near a good university is that we're going to need a steady flow of staff. And it's much easier to recruit agricultural research staff in an agricultural research town. So that was number two. Number three was we're going to need access to your research station from head offices in France, and you're going to need access to your various trial locations and research centers around the country. So make sure you're near a big airport that gives you good access, no more than an hour away from a good airport that gives you access to the rest of the United States and the rest of the world. And then the last criterion they gave me was perhaps the most telling. When you found something that meets all those objectives, remember, we're going to be trying to attract talent, not just from across the United States, but from all over the world. We're going to want the best people. So make sure it's somewhere they're going to like to live.
Very good. John? We saw the video, and certainly the convergence of data within the farming industry. I know from the aerospace industry, the amount of data that's now being provided that could tell someone where to water every morning if we need to. That huge amounts of data, it seems like you're trying to be at the forefront of managing that and helping the decision process for people. How did that happen in your head? I mean, obviously data is a big deal, but how did you make that connection?
Well, part of the vision starts with this idea that, I'm a wanderer by nature, and wandering on the land, what you perceive if you're out on your bicycle, for example, as storms roll by and they may or may not hit you, that there's an enormous amount of variability. And what started to happen in the research side of what we were doing actually started with the simple notion of how do you set priorities in a research center. And so if you have weather observations that are irregularly spaced across the landscape, you may find something that works really well in a certain sort of weather data environment, but you still can't set the priority. You have no idea how extensive that is and how many people could possibly take advantage of your innovation. So from the very beginning, there was a sense of trying to create what we call weather surfaces, which are using a lot of satellite data, using observed data, really good statistics, pulling us all together and creating, can you all hear me? Should I speak louder? I think we've lost our mics. So the purpose of data is to help drive better decisions. And so as you start to build what we call these weather surfaces, what we began to understand is that if you have an innovation, a variety of wheat, not only can you say something meteorologically and climatologically of where it would grow, you could actually look and see how many farms are there. You could find out how many people you could influence. And then, of course, food security comes into play. And a better word really is nutrient security, because we all know that it's not just calories. And so from that sort of rather humble vision, we began to realize that there is a paucity of this sort of information in any form across the ag value chain. And so by focusing on the farmer, what we found were things like in the class yesterday, the master class, I made a very interesting point about parts of East Africa where I was working. The farmers would get good rain in some parts of, say, a trade area of a small village, but when they went to buy their fertilizer, they could only buy it really from someone delivering it on a motorcycle, which is expensive. And the concept of big data says, well, wait a minute, we know that the rains were good in all of this area, and therefore all of those farmers would be looking to buy fertilizer, and the fertilizer dealer just needs to be told to get a bigger truck and go out there, could offer a big discount. they would buy more. And of course, you've just strengthened the value chain, because then you can also turn around and tell the buyer, someone in the supply chain, someone who wants the maize to feed their chickens, it's like they're going to have a surplus, send a bigger truck, they'll get a better price. And what you see happening, which in the United States, information is pervasive, it's symmetrical. Growers can sell, they hedge, they can sell to an elevator with, we heard earlier, with a calculation for the cost of shipping it built in. The point is, most of the world doesn't have this. And so as you start to take these very scalable tools, you create kind of a vision of an economy. And then, frankly, the increase in weather variability. I'm an agricultural climatologist. And, you know, people brace yourselves. The weather variability, this is going to become something that we just deal with. And agriculture struggles with that, because all a plant really wants is relatively normal things for about 80 to 120 days.
Means we need more predictive activity and more predictive data.
Or what we say, you know, climate smart agriculture is a vision. Weather agile agriculture is a practice. And those two things, you put them together, because you're not going to.
Yeah, say that again. That's really interesting.
I probably can't say it again.
It's a test to see how good
we
you
hear
are.
all about climate smart agriculture. Okay, that's a vision. That's smart. But weather agile agriculture is a practice. And what that means is you're informing people on things that are viable for right now. And the context then allows smallholder farmers or very large growers. And we sell to multinationals, and we sell to groups that send SMS texts on feature phones to farmers that are illiterate, using emoticons telling them the rains are coming tomorrow afternoon, meaning don't spray a water-soluble something out there today, or don't even try to walk to your fields. There's places in the world here today where just walking across a landscape that doesn't have bridges can be dangerous. And it's a vision, and we have a practice.
Very good. John Paul, I was fascinated by the fourth generation, going back to sheep four generations ago to where you are now. Seems like what you're trying to do is to be able to make sure that we utilize everything that we have, and perhaps utilize things that we have that we don't even know are something that we can use. Is that a good way of saying it? What made you take that jump from where your family was to now, and how did you really come to that idea?
So it's been a long path sort of to get us here, and I think I'm a millennial. I'm on the front edge, I guess. This beard makes me look older. My wife says that anyway. That's a shit. And millennials, we're known for taking things that have already existed and claiming them as our own. And so, as an example, I said to my oldest brother, I want to democratize investing and make this platform where people who aren't accredited can invest. And he's like the public stock market? And I was like, yeah, that's right. And so I think what's happening in agriculture to some degree is sort of a pushback to where things were. And with all the focus on yield, which is important, I think you're a $3 billion business because in the 1970s, a bunch of active consumers got involved and said, we want food grown this way. And it's sort of evolved. And I think consumers are pushing to that next level and saying, I want to be active. I want to be involved in the food system. And what technology is doing that's exciting beyond unmanned drones and things that are, that are really taking agriculture into a new age is connecting people back into the food system and making information more available, and so sort of lowering some of those gaps. And producers have to, I guess, sort of react to that. And I think being in Colorado, where it's sort of with I saw Katie Wallace here with New Belgium, like with all these great companies, Whitewave Foods, Boulder Brands, we're sort of at this epicenter of organic. Yeah. And I think when you talk about Silicon Valley, which you know my stance on it, in addition to technology as part of that innovation cluster, food is a big part of that, and that cultural aspect of food. And so I think people and consumers are vying for that authentic, and for us, there is this lifestyle that can be tapped into where you've got $60 billion being spent on lawns and gardens, and with proper access to information through technology, people can grow things pretty simply and start getting engaged again. And another turning point for us, quite candidly, was the passage of Amendment 64 and the legalization of cannabis. And I say that just because it's another agricultural crop for us. And what that industry is doing is allowing for innovation and allowing for companies to sort of innovate, particularly in controlled agriculture and indoor agriculture, and be able to, I guess, bear higher costs so that technologies can become more market available.
Very good.
Jump on. I would jump on. I think that those are excellent points that you just made, and just to help dimensionalize what that means back to Whitewave, since you threw us in, and Boulder Brands and other companies like us. I think one of the greatest challenges and opportunities that has occurred over the course of the last decade or so is what I like to call this democratization of innovation within the food industry. So if you think about what the natural foods industry as the forefront to this really brought into the food industry is the ability for small-scale food companies to come in and be relevant. And it didn't really exist if you think back, you guys look like you're more my age than his age. So if you think back 20 years ago or so, as a food manufacturer, you would go in and you would you'd make a call to the retailer, to the buyer at the retailer, typically on a national basis, or at least for their entire set of chains. It was more of a regional grocery construct at that point, but you really didn't have the opportunity to go and sell to a region of Whole Foods or to the state of Colorado within one UNFI warehouse, or within one other small retailer like a Molly Stone's out in California. And what happened over the last decade is a lot of small companies became incredibly relevant, made so by the low-cost consumer that John Paul mentioned, who was looking for the smaller niche brands with the better transparency back and the focus on the environment and the consumer. And I think that's really changed the landscape for CPGs. And you see some of the bigger manufacturers that have really been unable to keep up with that change, and that's created the opportunity, just as he said, for companies like Whitewave, Boulder Brands, and other Colorado companies to step in and fill that niche.
Can I tag on to that real short? So and if you look at to tag on to things, again, this infrastructure used to exist. Like the food co-op that the mayor talked about that's being built in Westwood, we had this infrastructure, and then it went away as California started dominating the market, and we converted to the commodity crops that we have now. So I say like same stuff, different day. We're rebuilding that again, and technology's helping build and help that piece. And analogous to that would be something like Uber, where it's like we help people connect and ask for rides. And it's like we need technology to ask people for rides, but what it's doing is it's helping, I guess, create a marketplace that overcomes some of the inefficiencies and allows smaller scale people to do so and be paid to do it. And I think that's one of the exciting things that's driving innovation, particularly in a state like Colorado.
Frank, one of the things that I think I'm always interested in is the tension that exists within a company. It exists within my company, it exists within a cabinet of the state. I'm sure, bridging the gap between Europe and the United States, and you were in between that, trying to be on both sides. How does that work? What's the creative tension? Colorado has really been pushing itself to be a home for foreign companies, particularly, and we have now over 10 different consulates here in the state. It's something that's really a part of this push that we're doing to grow our state and its economy. How have you found that between the countries and the continents?
Well, to be quite honest, and it's not just because I want to ingratiate myself to people in the room, of all the places I've visited in the world, Colorado is among the most friendly and welcoming. It's
you can stay.
Should I hug him?
Yeah, please.
That's up to US. That's up to USCIS, and if they give me a green card. But
yeah.
That's
Well, you've got a few hundred people sign up for you.
Yeah. So having seen businesses at work all the way around the world, yes, it is a very welcoming state. But I think within the company, the challenge is really quite different, and that is that many companies, and ours included, consider themselves to be global, international companies, when actually they're a collection of 100 different national companies that just happen to be scattered around the globe. And making the transition from a conglomeration of national companies into a truly global corporation is really difficult. We've got a team of marketing strategists working on that at the moment. Things like global branding will assist in that. But I would say that's the single most difficult step in globalization of a business.
Very good. If I can come back to you, there are huge amounts of data out there. What you're trying to do is make it accessible and have it in a way that people can use it productively, if I can paraphrase it. What's the biggest challenge in doing that? How do you get that information to the people, and how do you get them to be accustomed to using it?
So making the information available globally is actually done, that's where the technology comes in. So all of our data, which are global for all ag areas, are available through an API. So that part means that a programmer in any language can hit a computer-to-computer system that knows how to talk to each other, and they can pull this data. It's an application programmer interface. It's just it's a piece of technology that enables computers to talk to each other. So we have major multinationals that use Oracle and we're a SQL stack, and it makes no difference.
So they can handshake together.
Yeah. The real challenge actually plays into what we just heard from a different angle. So we're an emerging company. We've hired 20 people and doubled in size in the last 8 months. So we're at 42. We have offices. We've opened an office because of a new investor in Kuala Lumpur. We probably will have an office in Nairobi or Kampala. We've got a couple here in the States just because of the way the company grew organically. But what we're really facing now is this big challenge of just trying to, if you will, get the message out in a coherent fashion and hiring and finding talent. And we heard earlier the talent. And that's a piece of the relationship even with Colorado State University, hiring interns, finding PhDs. And this is an enormous amount of effort, not from the perspective of trying to stitch together 100 national companies, but trying to stitch together the talent to take it to a global footprint. And so events like this today, for us, are a big deal, as you can imagine, because even that video, all of you seeing something about this innovative sort of technology of data, and that drives an enormous amount of decisions and the big data conclusions of saying, look, a little bit of quantification can alter the outcome because you're going to be more often right than wrong, and that starts to be profits.
Right. Jason, back to the tension, you have a very large company that actually has two somewhat competing activities going on with the dairy and the non-dairy. How do you manage that, and is that something that fuels both, or does it keep them both competitive? How does that work in your company?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. You know, it's interesting, and I think the legacy businesses, when we first put them together, there was a lot more tension. You had folks that were really we like to call the true believers of the organic movement originally, and then the folks that were the true believers of the plant-based movement that really didn't like each other. And we put them all into a building, and I think there was a little bit of chaos at that point, but it was before my time, so I'm speaking from what I've heard. The way that we look at it now is we see that there is a need for both products. There's a need for dairy in general, very obvious need. It delivers incredible nutrition to children especially, but to adults as well. And so we very much believe in the dairy complex and the dairy products that come out of it. At the same time, we would say we even believe organic to be better than conventional for all the reasons that are typically ascribed to the environmental benefits especially. And you might believe there are other benefits as well back to the human consumers, which are a little bit less proven. But then on the non-dairy side, we recognize that there are folks that can't tolerate dairy. We believe there are people that don't want, for other reasons, ethical reasons or whatever it is in their lifestyle, that make that choice not to consume dairy. And we want to make sure that we can provide them with the same dairy experiences. You know, I mentioned the So Delicious brand. That's a brand whose vision basically is they think they exist so that no little kids go to birthday parties and can't have an ice cream, right? And that's a pretty powerful message. So we think there's coexistence opportunity there. We think there's absolute benefit to consumers across that entire continuum, and we try to fuel that.
Very good. I'll come back to John Paul in a second, but we're going to finish up here in a moment. I just want to give you a heads up. And what I'm going to ask the last question is, tell us something that we don't know. Tell us something that you think is going to happen in the future that would enlighten this group. So maybe you guys can think on that. But you mentioned cannabis, and that's really been a forefront of a lot of news here in Colorado, obviously. Is that mainstreaming into agriculture? How do you see the future there?
I mean, right now, you know, it's been fascinating to watch an industry go from black market to legal, and you've got people that were growing in their basement expanding out and evolving into, you know, any other agricultural commodity. And so absolutely, it's you know, it's a $3 billion industry right now. It's going to continue to grow, and Colorado's sort of at the epicenter of it. But I think, so that's on the cannabis front. And then to answer the last question in terms of, I think that there's going to be, you know, kind of beyond yield discussion. Like, we make soil, and I think that nutrition and nutritional kind of profiles of soil and how it translates to food can help differentiate. Just as organic used to be a differentiator, it still is a differentiator in production. I think the quality and the type of soil where food comes from I think is going to be a big key differentiator moving forward. That's something we're very, very excited about, and I think consumers are very much aware of it and ready for it. I love amaranth. That's my spirit plant. I'm super excited about amaranth. I'm not sure if most don't know about it, but just as an aside, I think amaranth has a big future as kind of a non-grain grain. So
Very good. If we were to reconvene this panel in a year from now, what would we be looking back on? Frank, what do you think is going to happen over the next year for you guys? What would be different and unique?
Could you give me a little bit more scope? Could you give me sort of 3 or 4 years on that?
Sure. We can give you 3 or 4 years. We're a friendly state, so we're going to let you have 3 years.
I think what the consumer can look forward to, and I'm talking from our range of crops, wheat, barley, etc. The consumer can look forward to these crops doing things for them in the future that they're just not expecting now. And we're going to see genetic changes, conventional or otherwise, in these crops, which will lead to making them more productive and more profitable for farmers, for instance. We're going to see changes in wheat starch, which will actually make wheat good for you. Wheat will contain higher levels of soluble fiber, will be better for glycemic index because of the changes in the starch composition. Barley varieties with characteristics that will make beer keep its flavor for longer and assist in head retention. So these traits are coming to the market, and we're going to see them within the 3 or 4 year time frame.
That's through genetic modification?
It could be done through genetic modification. In this particular instance, the 3 cases that I've quoted are all through conventional means.
John?
Well, I think that my perception of this question is the confluence of this population growth and weather variability. I think the idea of food security is going to become something closer to home to really everyone, and the idea of leveraging and not playing food as a leveraged political game, I think, is going to be important. There will be a lot of thinking and evolving in the way we humans treat each other.
Very good. Jason?
Yeah, I would build on Frank's comments. I think that you're going to see a continued migration, and probably an accelerated migration, to non-GMO foods. I lived in Europe, in Germany in particular, and it's obviously a much more already migrated stance over in Europe, and I believe that through those same natural retailers that I mentioned previously, that you're going to see a continued push that will accelerate, especially in the middle of the United States, towards that non-GMO platform for a number of reasons.
Well, very good. I'd like you to all thank our panelists. It was a terrific session.